Good morning. I'm Mark Allen with Gaper.io, and I'm here today with Brian Keane, the president of SmartPower.
Easy for you to say.
A little too early in the morning here. So how are you? Good afternoon, Brian. How are you?
Excellent. Mark, how you doing? Nice to be with you.
Yeah, except for the little problem with the mouth, I'm doing fine. So, can you share a brief background of yourself and your work experience?
Absolutely. So I am actually I'm the president of a not-for-profit organization called SmartPower, and I'm actually also the CEO of a for-profit entity, startup entity called WeGreen. And love to talk to you kind of about our experience kind of in with our office space, really going back 20 years, how we've kind of been living in an office space for 20 years, and then actually how we've transitioned out of that, and also for our startup, how we've worked with different vendors throughout the years.
Oh, interesting. And so do both companies have an office space or just the one?
Well, it's funny you should mention it. We've actually transitioned just before the pandemic. We actually even transitioned out of a space that we had leased, really going back now almost, well, probably close to 15 years. We had leased a space in downtown DC. And I like to say, I think I have lived through how people live and work in office spaces. And seriously, when we started SmartPower back in 2002, and I started it just by myself, and I had funding from foundations, but I literally started in my house. And it was like, well, where's your office? You have to get an office. You can't just work out of your house. You're not legit if you work out of your house. This doesn't make sense. And so it's like, great, I get an office, okay. And I got this great office in downtown Washington, D.C. And I did love it. It was great. But with that, you also have to get all the accoutrements. And to that, I did, I had the, you had to get the phone system. You had to get someone to actually answer the phones. You actually had to have, people literally, you'd have to go in to open the mail. You had to kind of build the entire infrastructure for the office. And we couldn't even actually outsource our AR and all that stuff. And so it really was kind of, you had to hire a lot of people. And that does, it was fun because I like to work with people. I like people, so I kind of like that. And it also, by the way, became a barometer for success, which was also quite interesting in those times. So we're talking early 2000s, like, oh, how many people you got working for you? It's like, oh, now I got more people and more people and more people. And it was funny how that's a barometer for success. But increasingly, then we would see that would change, and you could actually start outsourcing, say, your accounting abilities, and that just made sense. It was like, well, I actually don't need someone sitting here 10 hours a day, we're a mid-sized, not-for-profit organization. I didn't really need them sitting there counting every penny constantly, and again and again and again. And so, that could be outsourced. And then the work that we do at SmartPower is related to clean energy and energy efficiency. We do on-the-ground outreach campaigns. So a lot of our folks then are actually not working out of Washington. They're actually working in the States. And I was like saying, well, why don't you work out of your homes? And actually, all you really need is an internet connection and a computer. And then I actually need you not in the office. I need you out in your communities. That's really where this is happening. I need you talking to people and engaging with people and getting them to buy clean energy and energy efficiency products. And the home office really works for a lot of people. Now, by the way, a lot of people need kind of to be trained into how to work with a home office. But quite frankly, it saved us a lot of money as long as they had the right equipment and the right training. And training kind of means like the right connections, kind of like you had to touch base with them at the right time. And you had to make sure that, that, working at home didn't mean taking care of the kids. Oh, and then I also work. It's like, no, it's a real job. You're working and this is what you do. And I have kids at home too, by the way. So it is like, yeah, I got to make sure the kids are taken care of and I actually have to work. But over the years, we kind of figured it out. I still have my office in Washington, DC. Meanwhile, tell me if I should just stop talking. Meanwhile, we then, our lease would come up and increasingly I was like, wow, we are spending an awful lot of money for rent. And I like coming to the office, but there is this long commute. It wasn't that bad a commute, but traffic is just annoying. And then it was actually increasingly, you'd hire younger people, and we do hire younger people, and they would actually kind of say like, well, do I have to come in? And it's like, well, you get to come in. That's what I'm offering. But they were like, well, no, I could just do it from my house. And it's like, well, and then their argument was, well, if I worked, in Des Moines, you got people in Des Moines and they're working at their houses. Why can't I work at my house? And they had a good point. And so ultimately then at one point, our lease at SmartPower was up in our office in Washington. And we were also then starting our startup WeGreen. And it was like, well, and I really did I was like, well, just to make it simple, I didn't want to have to move. What am I going to do? Let's just sign again for this lease. And what was happening actually here in DC was Amazon was moving into Arlington, Virginia, and squeezing office space. And so, right, exactly. So the prices were going sky high. And so they were basically saying to me, okay, no deal, no great deal. And I was going to sign on for another $1 million of a lease for the next 7 years. And it's like, this is crazy. Like, I'm like, no way. Like, so I wound up, and this is before the pandemic. And so I wound up saying, I just think I need kind of like a space. Like, and we looked at all these WeWork spaces. We wound up going to a place called Tech Space, which is kind of, WeWork, but desks, a couple of independent offices if you want them. They get your mail, they get your phones, that type of stuff. Hundreds of dollars a month as opposed to thousands of dollars. Younger folks want to work there. It actually works in the way they want to work. And then, by the way, I can work at home, I can work there, I can kind of go back and forth. It's unbelievable. It's great. I mean, and I realized kind of like, oh, you know what? My office downtown, it was kind of like a closet, like, I mean, it's like, oh, there are my shoes. There's that jacket I've been looking for. It's like, wow, you have all these kind of stuff that you've accumulated, but I was kind of just too lazy to move out of it. And so they kind of, once the lease is up, they're going to like push you out because they won't lower the rates. And it's like, well, thank God they did. And then, by the way, the pandemic hits and it's like, wow, did I do the right thing? Because otherwise I'd be sitting on this monster lease that, makes no sense whatsoever. Tied to the fact then that basically everything I need done now, whether it's for WeGreen, the startup, or SmartPower, I can actually outsource and manage with a very small management team and get all the actual results I need, whether it's the IT support, on the ground outreach support. I can even outsource that. I can kind of like outsource all these great pieces and still actually create a culture within the company that actually still works. And that becomes a very important piece to me, is what is the culture? And so you can actually still do that while kind of working, if you will, remotely, but having a home base, and a home base becomes important. Yeah. And then actually outsourcing different key pieces. Anyway, it's a long way to say, I'm doing well. How are you, Mark?
I'm doing well too. Say outsource, I assume you mean outsource to a third party, not.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. And
because I mean, there are so many people who have, they want to be flexible in their work, and they don't want to be tied, 12 hours a day to me. And it's kind of like, well, actually, I don't want you tied to me either. So, we have a lot of creative work that needs to be done, but it's fits and starts. It needs to be done, for a week's worth of time every 6 weeks.
Right.
So it's like, I can't have you just sitting around for 5 weeks. And so this kind of works perfectly for me. It's like, hey, I can hire people, a team, to do the work for a week, and then they can kind of go away. And by the way, there's some places I can even just go and hire that same team 6 weeks later. So they actually kind of know the work I'm doing. So it's a very interesting work culture now, I think.
And especially I think, one of your companies is a startup, so you really have to watch the dollar.
Everything.
Helps a lot.
Yeah. And so you have to watch everything. And that's true in the nonprofit world too. You got to watch every dime. And you have to watch, you have to make sure that there's the return on it. And that's what's so interesting about office space today to me. I mean, it's kind of like I've said to my wife, that I'm not sure I've done much right, but I didn't go into commercial real estate. And so, and that might be the smartest thing I've done, because it has changed so much that, I'm not sure when the pandemic is over, people will still want to have a place, a home base for their businesses, but it's just going to be a very different thing. In that, yeah, I'd like to create a culture for my companies. You want a culture and a persona, if you will, for kind of the businesses. But it doesn't require people to be there 12 hours a day. It doesn't require an entire ecosystem of someone opening the mail and someone answering the phones and someone, sitting around 5 weeks so that they can then, do a postcard for you, on the 6th week. It's like,
Yeah.
no, that doesn't have to happen.
Right. Wow. So on that note, I think I already know the answer to this, but what do you think is the future of remote employment, and what do you think can be done differently to make it more effective?
Well, I think, the future is, and by the way, I think we were already headed there anyway before the pandemic. It was a slow boat. And what was happening, and we did see this too, what was happening was that in some, some law firms say you had almost 3 generations working in one office building. So you could have, the 75-year-old partner that should have been headed out. You could have the 50-year-old partner, and then you could have the 24-year-old out of school lawyer. And it's like, wow, those are very different types of working people. One is actually still taking dictation, and it's like, and one's like, what on earth is that? And so it was going to be a very slow transition. But now, because of the pandemic, everyone's at home, and they're kind of like, hey, this actually kind of works. There's no commute. I happen to be the first one in the office in the morning and the last one to leave. There's certain boundaries that we have to figure out. The stay, the work at home type thing. There's also certain, I want to see my colleagues beyond just a TV screen at some point. Sun Microsystems back in the day had tried this maybe 20 years ago, 15 years ago. And what they had set up was probably the precursor of WeWork. But they had basically said, okay, everyone can work at home, but on Wednesdays, you have to come to our remote office space, and we're going to do a 2-hour staff meeting and happy hour. And it's like, well, that's the way I want to work. So yeah, I can work at home. And then I want to have a meeting, tell you what I've done, find out what other people are doing, and know the people I'm working with. And so it's kind of like create something where there's still always this connection. There's this community of who we're working with and what we're doing. Because I do think that's a valuable piece of an employee and employment, that you do belong and that they belong, we belong together in kind of these things. It's even, and consultants, I think it's really important in the consultant language that if you're a consultant to a company, to say like, oh, and we are doing this. It's like, not like, oh, I don't know what that company is doing that I'm working for. It's like, the language I think becomes very important. And certainly to me, as someone who hires consultants, I like when they say, oh, what we're doing at SmartPower. It's like, yes, exactly. And what we're doing at WeGreen, it's like, yes, you are part of the team, and I will treat you as part of the team. That's really important to me.
Yeah, interesting you brought up Sun. I have friends that worked at Sun, and they really appreciated that. And for those people that don't know, the old Sun Microsoft building, or Sun Microsystems building, is now Facebook.
I didn't know that. Is that right?
Yes. Well, first Oracle Sun, and then they sold it to Facebook, and then Facebook just built up a whole campus around that, huge.
Yeah.
And people are wondering, what are they going to do with that space? Because I mean, in the last 5 years, that whole area has just boomed.
Yep.
And now they've said, hey, everyone can work from home. So
as well, right? Yeah.
It will be interesting. So, so what is the story behind SmartPower? I mean, it's a nice, catchy phrase, but what is it you actually do, and who are your customers and all that stuff?
Thanks a lot. So we are actually, we really have pioneered sustainability marketing, which really means that back in 2002, we were trying to figure out, how do you actually get people to buy clean energy products and energy efficiency products? How do you get people to buy solar power and energy efficiency? And for 30 years before that, they'd been selling, say, solar power because it's good for the environment. And it is good for the environment, don't get me wrong, but nobody was buying it. And yet, even back in 2002, when it was, it would cost $50,000 to put solar on your home, and there's no loans to get it. There's no, you don't walk into CVS and get solar. But 82% of the American people said they wanted to buy it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, wow, if 82% of the American people want to buy it and less than 3% are actually buying it, that's actually a marketing challenge. How do we actually get them to buy it? So we created SmartPower, really to start this sustainability marketing. How do we actually sell this stuff like it's Coca-Cola, sell it like it's McDonald's, get people to buy it for the reasons they want to buy it, not the reasons I want them to buy it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really kind of what we've done. And so now you actually see kind of, there are courses now in college called sustainability marketing. There are master's degrees on sustainability marketing. And we could have used some of that 20 years ago, but it's really kind of cool to see it happening. And WeGreen then is an outgrowth of that. That in fact, what we've realized at SmartPower is that the way people buy solar power is really simply because their friends and neighbors are buying it. You're actually 64% more likely to buy solar power because your next door neighbor has solar power. And it's the way people are getting information and marketing information today is simply from their friends and their neighbors, the people that they're most tight to in their social circle, really from the people they work with. And that is because we are so bombarded with marketing information constantly. You walk down the street, you're constantly being bombarded. So what really breaks through are the recommendations from your friends, your real friends and your neighbors. So it is kind of like, oh, we're going to see this movie tonight because Joe at the office suggested to watch this movie, or we should go to this restaurant because Mary at the gym suggested we should go see this restaurant. We should go to this restaurant. That stuff breaks through, and that's true with solar too. So then WeGreen is basically a digitized version of turbocharging this peer-to-peer, friend-to-friend, neighbor-to-neighbor connection. And so people with solar are actually talking to people who think they want solar and really convincing them to get it. And it's then tied to and connected to a green marketplace where people who say, well, I thought I wanted it, but it's actually too expensive, or I live in a dorm, I don't think I can buy it. But it's tied to a green marketplace where you can buy 10,000 other green products, whether it's light bulbs or thermostats or better refrigerators, and work your way up the food chain of sustainability. And if you are starting, if you say, hey, this is kind of interesting to me, it breaks through to your friends and neighbors like, oh, that's kind of cool. Maybe I'll try that too. I've always wanted solar. The number one reason people buy solar in this country today is, quote, because they always wanted solar. It's really interesting. It's really, that's kind of their value. It's interesting.
But I mean, cost savings I got to believe that's up there also, because there is an ROI on solar, correct? And it's coming short.
There is. And it's also interesting. It's skewing now like buying cars, which is, there's a value to looking cool in your neighborhood. People buy, if you really wanted to save money, and you wouldn't buy a car, but if you really want, and then everyone would be buying Kias, but hey, BMW sells a lot of cars. And so it's kind of getting like that, even though today, by the way, when you buy solar, it is in so many states now, it is cheaper, less expensive than conventional energy. So you actually save money on your utility bill when you have solar. But even in other states, basically what we're seeing is people are buying it because it's an affordability issue. It's like, hey, I can finally now afford it. I can get a zero down loan. The payment on what I pay for my loan, plus now what I pay to my utility bill is now less than what I had been paying to my utility.
Right.
I'm going to do this. I've always wanted solar. I'm going to do it. So it's really cool. And my neighbors have it.
Yeah, and now it is it is just a matter of when, not if. And
yeah, it is. And it actually goes, by the way, to the point that everyone's working at home too. So they're actually using more energy at home, and they actually want to do home improvements. And this is a home improvement that can be done while you're in the house, but social distancing, because they actually don't even have to come into the house.
Yeah. And another little known fact about the Bay Area, since we brought it up, Solar City is
it's right there,
3 miles from me. And they actually took over the old Visa building.
That's unbelievable, isn't it? It's unbelievable.
I know.
And actually, what's interesting with SmartPower, so we actually really pioneered kind of this and perfected this on the ground outreach campaign. We do these campaigns. We did $100 million of installed solar in 3 years' time. And Solar City would come into the communities we were with, the campaigns would finish, and then they'd come in and kind of on the coattails pick up all these other houses and families that wanted solar. It was really kind of unbelievably success story.
Yes. So we've talked about the pandemic that forced everybody to go remote back in March. Did that cause any roadblocks or challenges that you didn't expect?
Well, I just say at the outset, we're unbelievably fortunate that, just health-wise, we're very lucky, and employment-wise, we're very lucky, in that just personally, I'm in a position that I can work at home, and that we don't have to, we're not in a service industry in that regard. But the immediate kind of response was kind of on the first kind of the economic piece of like, oh my God, how's this gonna play out? So there was kind of this immediate like, what's next, and when does the other shoe drop? And you probably felt it too. Everyone kind of felt that, And I would also I think there was a lot of psychology in this whole, how everyone was trying to deal with it too. And part of that also was that initially it was kind of like, okay, well, we can deal with this for 2 or 3 weeks. And it was like, so we just hang out for 2 or 3 weeks. And then I was like, well, wait, it's not really just hanging out. We got to make this work for 2 or 3 months. Yeah, and it's kind of like, wow. And so all of a sudden, then there is kind of like, okay, there is this new normal. So how are we going to make this new normal work? And that kind of started, I think, slowly seeping in. And it's funny because it had to seep into management, like me. You has to kind of, okay, so wait a minute, we got to figure that out. And then seeps into the staff. And so you kind of really had to kind of get everybody on track. And then you kind of realize like, okay, so there is a lot that actually can keep moving, even in this kind of weird space, a weird time, provided everybody's safe and everybody's healthy, and we can kind of keep moving forward. The other thing that is very interesting, just as it relates to kind of the sustainability stuff, and really as it relates to sustainability, is that up until the pandemic, we had been saying the number one threat that the Earth faces is climate change. And then COVID hit. And it was like, so the number 2 threat the world faces is climate change. And it was like, well, that's interesting. And yet, truthfully, we'd always said as environmentalists that, climate and health go hand in glove, and they do. And so there is kind of this very interesting kind of connection, especially as COVID, does hit your lungs. It hits kind of people who with compromised lungs, and people with compromised lungs, they live in places that have bad air quality. And so that is a climate issue, so you kind of said a lot of research being done on that. And then you realize like, okay, so by the way, the climate crisis still isn't going away. And what we saw immediately, what was really fascinating, was that cars were coming off the road, and small, you could literally see Beijing from space for the first time in decades. And that was really cool. And you could actually see, the canals in Venice, they were cleared up. You could actually see dolphins in the canals and stuff like that, because nobody was around. And what it actually showed to us was that behavior change is real. You could actually change behavior very quickly. Human behavior changed very quickly because of this. And behavior change is so important in climate. It's going to be it has to be part of what we do. It's not the only solution, but it's a big piece. Technology is a huge solution. How we live our lives is a huge solution. And we know we can do it because we're doing it with COVID. And so we also then see that what we're starting to feel now is kind of this, people are adopting to, okay, so this isn't just a couple of months, this is going to be a longer slog. And there is this pent up demand for solar. And so kind of all the research that's coming out now is that 2021 is going to be a huge year for solar. And that, it was a big slowdown, but not a stop. And that'll be a huge year in 2021. So it does feel encouraging in that regard. So we're pretty excited. And then energy efficiency products and services are going to be very important moving forward too, especially as people move and realize that they can stay at home working, but they're going to want to make sure that their utility bills are low. that they're not going to want to take the burden of, you know, the increased energy use that they're doing at home. You already see it, by the way, in municipal trash removal, you know, that there's so much trash that they're moving from homes nowadays because people are home 24/7. They're not taking it from downtown DC or downtown San Francisco. They're taking it from the homes.
Mm.
And so it's the same challenge that the utilities are having delivering energy to the homes now. You know, this time of day usually would be, my home would not be on, you know, I mean, I'd be at the office supposedly.
Right.
And now everybody's home.
Yes. And I agree. And it's funny too. I mean, just all the little change, like the traffic in the San Francisco Bay Area. Like I used to, if someone says, I want you to come into the city at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I would just laugh at them. So you gotta be kidding me.
I know.
Right now
exactly.
it's like, oh, 3 o'clock. Yeah, no problem.
I'll be there in 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Exactly. Okay.
It's crazy. And you do see that, I mean, despite the fires, you know, forget that. I mean, the air quality is definitely better. You notice, you see it.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
It's amazing. The thing that's going to be interesting is, and we'll see, we're kind of seeing some of that here, is as the seasons change, and there is a continued push to try to, you know, entertain outdoors as long as possible, that you're going to start having more and more people, you know, heating outdoors. And so, and it kind of seems like a joke, but it is like, right. So we're not driving our cars. Instead, we're just going to directly light the outdoors on fire, you know? So it is like, you're going to have a lot more propane tanks outside, a lot more fires. I don't know the solution, but that's not a solution, except that we are living through a pandemic. So, you know, you got to give somewhere. Well, people got to get outside, and people are going. I tell people we've been very lucky. All we're suffering from is cabin fever, you know, but it's real. You know? It
is. Well, and I mean, like the propane heaters, that's been a standard part of life, and you know,
out there for sure.
But we're totally used to that, because it never really, I mean, never really gets that cold here. I know people here say, "Oh my God, it's so cold." Yeah. I'm originally from Buffalo, New York. They have no idea.
Yeah, you know cold.
I've lived in DC too, and DC, not Buffalo, but it does. Yeah. You do get snow there, and you do get down into the teens.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
That
exactly.
50 degrees is not cold. That's about as cold as it gets here.
And then you get one of those nice propane tanks over there, with heaters over here, and that's pretty sweet.
Yes. So.
Yeah, that's great.
Well, Brian, I want to thank you for your time today. This has been fascinating. SmartPower is already well established. Obviously, I wish We Green all the best luck in the world. I hope it is a great success. Do you want to give everyone the URL of it?
Absolutely, please. So it's so for We Green, it's WEE.green, and SmartPower is smartpower.org. And if folks are interested in starting their own We Green solarized campaigns, just go to WEE.green, or feel free to email me at bkeane, KEANE, @we.green, and we can get you started in running your own solar campaign right wherever you're living, and we'll get your whole community going solar.
That sounds great.
Excellent.
Well, have a great day, and thank you again.
Thanks, Mark. Really enjoyed it.
Bye.